One day the dolls were left all to themselves. Their little mistress had placed them all around the room and told them to be nice children while she was away. And there they sat, and never even so much as wiggled a finger until their mistress had left the room. Then the soldier dolly turned his head and solemnly winked at Raggedy Ann. And when the front gate clicked and the dollies knew they were alone in the house, they all scrambled to their feet. "Now let's have a good time," cried the tin soldier. "Let's all go in search of something to eat." "Yes, let's all go in search of something to eat," cried all the other dollies. "When Mistress had me out playing with her this morning," said Raggedy Ann, "she carried me by a door near the back of the house, and I smelled something which smelled as if it would taste delicious." "Then you lead the way, Raggedy Ann," cried the French dolly. "I think it would be a good plan to elect Raggedy Ann as our leader on this expedition," said the Indian doll. At this, all the other dolls clapped their hands together and shouted, "Hurrah! Raggedy Ann will be our leader!" So Raggedy Ann, very proud indeed to have the confidence and love of all the other dollies, said that she would be very glad to be their leader. "Follow me!" she cried as her wobbly legs carried her across the floor at a lively pace. The other dollies followed, racing about the house until they came to the pantry door. "This is the place!" cried Raggedy Ann. And sure enough, all the dollies smelled something which they knew must be very good to eat. But none of the dollies was tall enough to open the door. And although they pushed and pulled with all their might, the door remained tightly closed. The dollies were talking and pulling and pushing, and every once in a while one would fall over and the others would step on her in their efforts to open the door. Finally, Raggedy Ann drew away from the others and sat down on the floor. When the other dollies discovered Raggedy Ann sitting there, running her rag hands through her yarn hair, they knew she was thinking. "Shh! Shh!" they said to each other, and quietly went over near Raggedy Ann and sat down in front of her. "There must be a way to get inside," said Raggedy Ann. "Raggedy says there must be a way to get inside," cried all the dolls. "I can't seem to think clearly today," said Raggedy Ann. "It feels as if my head were ripped." At this, the French doll ran to Raggedy Ann and took off her bonnet. "Yes, there is a rip in your head, Raggedy," she said, and pulled a pin from her skirt and pinned up Raggedy's head. "It's not a very neat job, for I got some puckers in it," she said. "Oh, that is ever so much better," cried Raggedy Ann. "Now I can think quite clearly." "Now Raggedy can think quite clearly," cried all the dolls. "My thoughts must have leaked out the rip before," said Raggedy Ann. "They must have leaked out before, dear Raggedy," cried all the other dolls. "Now that I can think so clearly," said Raggedy Ann, "I think the door must be locked, and to get in we must unlock it." "That will be easy," said the Dutch doll, who says "Mama" when he is tipped backwards and forward. "For we will have the brave tin soldier shoot the key out of the lock." "I can easily do that," cried the tin soldier, as he raised his gun. "Oh, Raggedy Ann," cried the French dolly, "please do not let him shoot." "No," said Raggedy Ann, "we must think of a quieter way." After thinking quite hard for a moment, Raggedy Ann jumped up and said, "I have it!" And she caught up the jumping jack and held him up to the door. Then Jack slid up his stick and unlocked the door. Then the dollies all pushed and the door swung open. My, such a scramble! The dolls piled over one another in their desire to be the first at the goodies. They swarmed upon the pantry shelves, and in their eagerness spilled a pitcher of cream, which ran all over the French dolly's dress. The Indian doll found some cornbread, and dipping it in the molasses, he sat down for a good feast. A jar of raspberry jam was overturned, and the dollies ate of this until their faces were all purple. The tin soldier fell from the shelf 3 times and bent one of his tin legs, but he scrambled right back up again. Never had the dolls had so much fun and excitement, and they had all eaten their fill when they heard the click of the front gate. They did not take time to climb from the shelves, but all rolled or jumped off to the floor and scrambled back to their room as fast as they could run, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs and jam along the way. Just as their mistress came into the room, the dolls dropped in whatever positions they happened to be in. "This is funny," cried Mistress. "They were all left sitting in their places around the room. I wonder if Fido has been shaking them up." Then she saw Raggedy Ann's face and picked her up. "Why, Raggedy Ann, you are all sticky. I do believe you are covered with jam." And Mistress tasted Raggedy Ann's hand. "Yes, it's jam. Shame on you, Raggedy Ann. You've been in the pantry, and all the others too." And with this, the doll's mistress dropped Raggedy Ann on the floor and left the room. When she came back, she had on an apron and her sleeves were rolled up. She picked up all the sticky dolls, and putting them in a basket, she carried them out under the apple tree in the garden. There she had placed her little tub and wringer, and she took the dolls one at a time and scrubbed them with a scrubbing brush and soused them up and down and this way and that in the soap suds until they were clean. Then she hung them all out on the clothesline in the sunshine to dry. There the dolls hung all day, swinging and twisting about as the breeze swayed the clothesline. "I do believe she scrubbed my face so hard she wore off my smile," said Raggedy Ann after an hour of silence. "No, it is still there," said the tin soldier, as the wind twisted him around so he could see Raggedy. "But I do believe my arms will never work without squeaking. They feel so rusted," he added. Just then the wind twisted the little Dutch doll and loosened his clothespin so that he fell to the grass below with a sawdusty bump. And as he rolled over, he said, "Mama!" in a squeaky voice. Late in the afternoon, the back door opened and the little mistress came out with the table and chairs. After setting the table, she took all the dolls from the line and placed them about the table. They had lemonade with grape jelly in it, which made it a beautiful lavender color, and little baby teeny-weeny cookies with powdered sugar on them. After this lovely dinner, the dollies were taken in the house, where they had their hair brushed and nice clean nighties put on. Then they were placed in their beds, and Mistress kissed each one good night and tiptoed from the room. All the dolls lay as still as mice for a few minutes. Then Raggedy Ann raised up on her cotton-stuffed elbows and said, "I have been thinking." "Shh!" said all the other dollies. "Raggedy has been thinking." "Yes," said Raggedy Ann, "I have been thinking. Our mistress gave us the nice dinner out under the trees to teach us a lesson. She wished us to know that we could have had all the goodies we wished, whenever we wished, if we had behaved ourselves. And our lesson was that we must never take without asking what we could always have for the asking. So let us all remember and try never again to do anything which might cause those who love us any unhappiness." "Let us all remember," chimed all the other dollies. And Raggedy Ann, with a merry twinkle in her shoe-button eyes, lay back in her little bed, her cotton head filled with thoughts of love and happiness. Raggedy Ann watched with interest the preparations. A number of sticks were being fastened together with strings and covered with light cloth. Raggedy Ann heard some of the boys talk of the kite, so Raggedy Ann knew this must be a kite. When a tail had been fastened to the kite and a large ball of heavy twine tied to the front, one of the boys held the kite up in the air, and another boy walked off, unwinding the ball of twine. There was a nice breeze blowing, so the boy with the twine called, "Let her go!" and started running. Marcella held Raggedy up so that she could watch the kite sail through the air. How nicely it climbed! But suddenly the kite acted strangely, and as all the children shouted advice to the boy with the ball of twine, The kite began darting this way and that, and finally, making 4 or 5 loop-the-loops, it crashed to the ground. "It needs more tail on it," one boy shouted. Then the children asked each other where they might get more rags to fasten to the tail of the kite. "Let's tie Raggedy Ann to the tail," suggested Marcella. "I know she would enjoy a trip way up in the sky." The boys all shouted with delight at this new suggestion, so Raggedy Ann was tied to the tail of the kite. This time the kite rose straight in the air and remained steady. The boy with the ball of twine unwound it until the kite and Raggedy Ann were way, way up and far away. How Raggedy Ann enjoyed being up there! She could see for miles and miles! And how tiny the children looked! Suddenly a great puff of wind came and carried Raggedy Ann streaming way out behind the kite. She could hear the wind singing on the twine as the strain increased. Suddenly Raggedy Ann felt something rip. It was the rag to which she was tied. As each puff of wind caught her, the rip widened. When Marcella watched Raggedy Ann rise high above the field, she wondered how much Raggedy Ann enjoyed it, and wished that she, too, might have gone along. But after the kite had been up in the air for 5 or 10 minutes, Marcella grew restless. Kites were rather tiresome. There was more fun in tea parties out under the apple tree. "Will you please pull down the kite now?" she asked the boy with the twine. "I want Raggedy Ann." "Let her ride up there," the boy replied. "We'll bring her home when we pull down the kite. We're going to get another ball of twine and let her go higher." Marcella did not like to leave Raggedy Ann with the boys, so she sat down upon the ground to wait until they pulled the kite down. But while Marcella watched Raggedy Ann, a dot in the sky, she could not see the wind ripping the rag to which Raggedy was tied. Suddenly the rag parted and Raggedy Ann went sailing away as the wind caught in her skirts. Marcella jumped from the ground, too surprised to say anything. The kite, released from the weight of Raggedy Ann, began darting and swooping to the ground. "We'll get her for you," some of the boys said when they saw Marcella's troubled face, and they started running in the direction Raggedy Ann had fallen. Marcella and the other girls ran with them. They ran and they ran and they ran, and at last they found the kite upon the ground with one of the sticks broken, but they could not find Raggedy Ann anywhere. "She must have fallen almost in your yard," a boy said to Marcella, "for the kite was directly over here when the doll fell." Marcella was heartbroken. She went in the house and lay on the bed. Mamma went out with the children and tried to find Raggedy Ann, but Raggedy Ann was nowhere to be seen. When Daddy came home in the evening, he tried to find Raggedy, but met with no success. Marcella had eaten hardly any dinner, nor could she be comforted by Mamma or Daddy. The other dolls in the nursery lay forgotten, and were not put to bed that night, for Marcella lay and sobbed and tossed about her bed. Finally she said a little prayer for Raggedy Ann and went to sleep. And as she slept, Marcella dreamed that the fairies came and took Raggedy Ann with them to Fairyland for a visit, and then sent Raggedy Ann home to her. She awakened with a cry. Of course Mamma came to her bed right away and said that Daddy would offer a reward in the morning for the return of Raggedy. "It was all my fault, Mamma," Marcella said. "I should not have offered the boys dear old Raggedy Ann to tie on the tail of the kite, but I just know the fairies will send her back." Mamma took her in her arms and soothed her with cheering words, although she felt indeed that Raggedy Ann was truly lost and would never be found again. Now where do you suppose Raggedy Ann was all this time? When Raggedy Ann dropped from the kite, the wind caught in her skirts and carried her along until she fell in the fork of the large elm tree directly over Marcella's house. When Raggedy Ann fell with a thud, face up, in the fork of the tree, 2 robins, who had a nest near by, flew chattering away. Presently the robins returned and quarreled at Raggedy Ann for laying so close to their nest, but Raggedy Ann only smiled at them and did not move. When the robins quieted down and quit their quarreling, one of them hopped up closer to Raggedy Ann in order to investigate. It was Mamma Robin. She called to Daddy Robin and told him to come. "See the nice yarn! We could use it to line the nest with," she said. So the robins hopped closer to Raggedy Ann and asked if they might have some of her yarn hair to line their nest. Raggedy Ann smiled at them, so the 2 robins pulled and tugged at Raggedy Ann's yarn hair until they had enough to line their nest nice and soft. Evening came and the robins sang their good-night songs, and Raggedy Ann watched the stars come out, twinkle all night, and disappear in the morning light. In the morning the robins again pulled yarn from Raggedy Ann's head and loosened her so she could peep over the side of the limb. And when the sun came up, Raggedy Ann saw she was in the trees in her own yard. Now before she could eat any breakfast, Marcella started out to find Raggedy Ann, and it was Marcella herself who found her, and this is how she did it. Mamma Robin had seen Marcella and Raggedy Ann out in the yard many times, so she began calling, "Cheery, cheery!" and Daddy Robin started calling, "Cheery, cheery! Cheer up, cheer up! Cheerily, cheerily, cheery, cheery!" And Marcella, looking up into the tree above the house to see the robins, discovered Raggedy Ann peeping over the limb at her. Oh, how her heart beat with happiness! "Here is Raggedy Ann!" she shouted. And Mamma and Daddy came out and saw Raggedy smiling at them, and Daddy got the clothes prop and climbed out of the attic window and poked Raggedy Ann out of the tree, and she fell right into Marcella's arms, where she was hugged in a tight embrace. "You'll never go up on a kite again, Raggedy Ann," said Marcella, "for I felt so lost without you. I will never let you leave me again." So Raggedy Ann went into the house and had breakfast with her little mistress, and Mamma and Daddy smiled at each other when they peeped through the door into the breakfast room, for Raggedy Ann's smile was wide and very yellow. Marcella, her heart full of happiness, was feeding Raggedy Ann part of her egg. Raggedy Ann lay just as Marcella had dropped her, all sprawled out with her rag arms and legs twisted in ungraceful attitudes. Her yarn hair was twisted and lay partly over her face, hiding one of her shoe-button eyes. Raggedy gave no sign that she had heard, but lay there smiling at the ceiling. Perhaps Raggedy Ann knew that what the new dolls said was true. But sometimes the truth may hurt, and this may have been the reason Raggedy Ann lay there so still. Did you ever see such an ungainly creature? I do believe it has shoe buttons for eyes! And yarn hair! Mercy, did you ever see such feet? The Dutch doll rolled off the doll sofa and said, "Mama!" in his quavery voice. He was so surprised at hearing anyone speak so of beloved Raggedy Ann. Dear Raggedy Ann, she of the candy heart, whom all the dolls loved. Uncle Clem was also very much surprised and offended. He walked up front of the 2 new dolls and looked them sternly in the eyes, but he could think of nothing to say, so he pulled at his yarn mustache. Marcella had only received the 2 new dolls that morning. They had come in the morning mail and were presents from an aunt. Marcella had named the 2 new dolls Annabel Lee and Thomas after her aunt and uncle. Annabel Lee and Thomas were beautiful dolls, and must have cost heaps and heaps of shiny pennies, for both were handsomely dressed and had real hair. Annabel's hair was of a lovely shade of auburn, and Thomas's was golden yellow. Annabel was dressed in soft, lace-covered silk, and upon her head she wore a beautiful hat with long silk ribbons tied in a neat bow knot beneath her dimpled chin. Thomas was dressed in an Oliver Twist suit of dark velvet with a lace collar. Both he and Annabel wore lovely black slippers and short stockings. They were sitting upon two of the little red doll chairs where Marcella had placed them, and where they could see the other dolls. When Uncle Clem walked in front of them and pulled his mustache, they laughed outright. "Tee-hee!" they snickered. "He has holes in his knees!" Quite true. Uncle Clem was made of worsted, and the moths had eaten his knees and part of his kiltie. He had a kiltie, you see, for Uncle Clem was a Scotch doll. Uncle Clem shook, but he felt so hurt he could think of nothing to say. He walked over and sat down beside Raggedy Ann and brushed her yarn hair away from her shoe button eye. The Tin Soldier went over and sat beside them. "Don't you mind what they say, Raggedy," he said. "They do not know you as we do." "We don't care to know her," said Annabel Lee, as she primped her dress. "She looks like a scarecrow." "And the soldier must have been made with a can opener," laughed Thomas. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," said the French dolly, as she stood before Annabel and Thomas. "You will make all of us sorry that you have joined our family if you continue to poke fun at us and look down upon us. We are all happy here together, and share in each other's adventures and happiness." Now that night Marcella did not undress the two new dolls, for she had no nighties for them, so she let them sit up in the two little red doll chairs so they would not muss their clothes. "I will make nighties for you tomorrow," she said, as she kissed them good night. Then she went over and gave Raggedy Ann a good night hug. "Take good care of all my children, Raggedy," she said as she went out. Annabel and Thomas whispered together. "Perhaps we have been too hasty in our judgment," said Annabel Lee. "This Raggedy Ann seems to be a favorite with the mistress and with all the dolls." "There must be a reason," replied Thomas. "I am beginning to feel sorry that we spoke of her looks. One cannot help one's looks after all." Now Annabel Lee and Thomas were very tired after their long journey, and soon they fell asleep and forgot all about the other dolls. When they were sound asleep, Raggedy Ann slipped quietly from her bed and awakened the Tin Soldier and Uncle Clem, and the three tiptoed to the two beautiful new dolls. They lifted them gently so as not to awaken them, and carried them to Raggedy Ann's bed. Raggedy Ann tucked them in snugly and lay down upon the hard floor. The Tin Soldier and Uncle Clem both tried to coax Raggedy Ann into accepting their bed. They slept together, but Raggedy Ann would not hear of it. "I am stuffed with nice soft cotton, and the hard floor does not bother me at all," said Raggedy. At daybreak the next morning, Annabel and Thomas awakened to find themselves in Raggedy Ann's bed, and as they raised up and looked at each other, each knew how ashamed the other felt, for they knew Raggedy Ann had generously given them her bed. There Raggedy Ann lay, all sprawled out upon the hard floor, her rag arms and legs twisted in ungraceful attitudes. "How good and honest she looks," said Annabel. "It must be her shoe-button eyes." "How nicely her yarn hair falls in loops over her face!" exclaimed Thomas. "I did not notice how pleasant her face looked last night." "The others seem to love her ever and ever so much," mused Annabel. "It must be because she is so kind." Both new dolls were silent for a while, thinking deeply. "How do you feel?" Thomas finally asked. "Very much ashamed of myself," answered Annabel. "And you, Thomas?" "As soon as Raggedy Ann awakens, I shall tell her just how much ashamed I am of myself, and if she can, I want her to forgive me," Thomas said. "The more I look at her, the better I like her," said Annabel. "I am going to kiss her," said Thomas. "You'll awaken her if you do," said Annabel. But Thomas climbed out of bed and kissed Raggedy Ann on her painted cheek, and smoothed her yarn hair from her rag forehead. And Annabel Lee climbed out of bed too and kissed Raggedy Ann. Then Thomas and Annabel Lee gently carried Raggedy Ann and put her in her own bed and tenderly tucked her in, and then took their seats in the two little red chairs. After a while, Annabel said softly to Thomas, "I feel ever and ever so much better and happier." "So do I," Thomas replied. "It's like a whole lot of sunshine coming into a dark room, and I shall always try to keep it there." Fido had one fuzzy white ear sticking up over the edge of his basket, and he gave his tail a few thumps against his pillow. Raggedy Ann lay quietly in bed where Thomas and Annabel had tucked her, and as she smiled at the ceiling, her candy heart, with "I love you" written on it, thrilled with contentment, for, as you have probably guessed, Raggedy Ann had not been asleep at all. All the dolls were tucked snugly in their little doll beds for the night, and the large house was very still. Every once in a while Fido would raise one ear and partly open one eye, for his keen dog sense seemed to tell him that something was about to happen. Finally he opened both eyes, sniffed into the air, and getting out of his basket and shaking himself, he trotted across the nursery to Raggedy Ann's bed. Fido put his cold nose in Raggedy Ann's neck. She raised her head from the little pillow. "Oh, it's you, Fido," said Raggedy Ann. "I dreamed the tin soldier put an icicle down my neck." "I can't sleep," Fido told Raggedy Ann. "I feel that something is about to happen." "You have been eating too many bones lately, Fido, and they keep you awake," Raggedy replied. "No, it isn't that. I haven't had any bones since the folks had beef last Sunday. It isn't that. Listen, Raggedy." Raggedy Ann listened. There was a murmur as if someone were singing far away. "What is it?" asked Fido. "Shh!" cautioned Raggedy Ann. "It's music." It was indeed music, the most beautiful music Raggedy Ann had ever heard. It grew louder, but still seemed to be far away. Raggedy Ann and Fido could hear it distinctly, and it sounded as if hundreds of voices were singing in unison. "Please don't howl, Fido," Raggedy Ann said, as she put her two rag arms around the dog's nose. Fido usually sang when he heard music. But Fido did not sing this time. He was filled with wonder. It seemed as if something very nice was going to happen. Raggedy Ann sat upright in bed. The room was flooded with a strange, beautiful light, and the music came floating in through the nursery window. Raggedy Ann hopped from her bed and ran across the floor, trailing the bedclothes behind her. Fido followed close behind, and together they looked out the window across the flower garden. There, among the flowers, were hundreds of tiny beings, some playing on tiny reed instruments and flower horns, while others sang. This was the strange, wonderful music Raggedy and Fido had heard. "It's the fairies," said Raggedy Ann. "To your basket, quick, Fido! They are coming this way!" And Raggedy Ann ran back to her bed with the bedclothes trailing behind her. Fido gave 3 jumps, and he was in his basket pretending he was sound asleep, but one little black eye was peeping through a chink in the side. Raggedy jumped into her bed and pulled the covers to her chin, but lay so that her shoe-button eyes could see towards the window. Little fairy forms, radiant as silver, came flitting into the nursery, singing in faraway voices. They carried a little bundle. A beautiful light came from this bundle, and to Raggedy Ann and Fido it seemed like sunshine and moonshine mixed. It was a soft, mellow light, just the sort of light you would expect to accompany fairy folk. As Raggedy watched, her candy heart went pitty-pat against her cotton stuffing, for she saw a tiny pink foot sticking out of the bundle of light. The fairy troop sailed across the nursery and through the door with their bundle, and Raggedy Ann and Fido listened to their faraway music as they went down the hall. Presently the fairies returned without the bundle and disappeared through the nursery window. Raggedy Ann and Fido again ran to the window and saw the fairy troop dancing among the flowers. The light from the bundle still hung about the nursery, and a strange, lovely perfume floated about. When the fairies' music ceased and they had flown away, Raggedy Ann and Fido returned to Raggedy's bed to think it all out. When old Mr. Sun peeped over the garden wall and into the nursery, and the other dolls awakened, Raggedy Ann and Fido were still puzzled. "What is it, Raggedy Ann?" asked the Tin Soldier and Uncle Clem in one voice. Before Raggedy Ann could answer, Marcella came running into the nursery, gathered up all the dolls in her arms, and ran down the hall, Fido jumping beside her and barking shrilly. "Be quiet," Marcella said to Fido. "It's asleep and you might awaken it." Mama helped Marcella arrange all the dolls in a circle around the bed so that they could all see what was in the bundle. Mama gently pulled back the soft covering, and the dolls saw a tiny little fist as pink as coral, a soft little face with a cunning tiny pink nose, and a little head as bald as the French dolly's when her hair came off. My, how the dollies all chattered when they were once again left alone in the nursery. "A dear cuddly baby brother for Mistress," said Uncle Clem. "A beautiful bundle of love and fairy sunshine for everybody in the house," said Raggedy Ann, as she went to the toy piano and joyously played "Peter, Peter, Pumpkin Eater" with one rag hand. Marcella was having a tea party up in the nursery when Daddy called to her, so she left the dollies sitting around the tiny table and ran downstairs carrying Raggedy Ann with her. Mama, Daddy, and a strange man were talking in the living room, and Daddy introduced Marcella to the stranger. The stranger was a large man with kindly eyes and a cheery smile, as pleasant as Raggedy Ann's. He took Marcella upon his knee and ran his fingers through her curls as he talked to Daddy and Mama, so of course Raggedy Ann liked him from the beginning. "I have two little girls," he told Marcella. "Their names are Virginia and Doris. And one time when we were at the seashore, they were playing in the sand and they covered up Freddie, Doris's boy doll, in the sand. They were playing that Freddie was in bathing and that he wanted to be covered with the clean white sand, just as the other bathers did. And when they covered Freddie, they took their little pails and shovels and went farther down the beach to play and forgot all about Freddie. Now when it came time for us to go home, Virginia and Doris remembered Freddie and ran down to get him. But the tide had come in and Freddie was way out under the water and they could not find him. Virginia and Doris were very sad, and they talked of Freddie all the way home. "It was too bad they forgot Freddie," said Marcella. "Yes, indeed it was," the new friend replied as he took Raggedy Ann up and made her dance on Marcella's knee. "But it turned out all right after all, for do you know what happened to Freddie?" "No, what did happen to him?" Marcella asked. "Well, first of all, when Freddie was covered with the sand, he enjoyed it immensely, and he did not mind it so much when the tide came up over him, for he felt Virginia and Doris would return and get him. But presently Freddie felt the sand above him move as if someone was digging him out. Soon his head was uncovered, and he could look right up through the pretty green water. And what do you think was happening? The Tide Fairies were uncovering Freddie. When he was completely uncovered, the Tide Fairies swam with Freddie way out to the Undertow Fairies. The Undertow Fairies took Freddie and swam with him way out to the Roller Fairies. The Roller Fairies carried Freddie up to the surface and tossed him up to the Spray Fairies, who carried him to the Wind Fairies. "And the Wind Fairies?" Marcella asked breathlessly. "The Wind Fairies carried Freddie right to our garden, and there Virginia and Doris found him, none the worse for his wonderful adventure." "Freddie must have enjoyed it, and your little girls must have been very glad to get Freddie back again," said Marcella. "Raggedy Ann went up in the air on the tail of a kite one day and fell and was lost, so now I am very careful with her." "Would you let me take Raggedy Ann for a few days?" asked the new friend. Marcella was silent. She liked the stranger friend, but she did not wish to lose Raggedy Ann. "I will promise to take very good care of her, and return her to you in a week. Will you let her go with me, Marcella?" Marcella finally agreed, and when the stranger friend left, he placed Raggedy Ann in his grip. "It is lonely without Raggedy Ann," said the dollies each night. "We miss her happy painted smile and her cheery ways," they said. And so the week dragged by. But my, what chatter there was in the nursery the first night after Raggedy Ann returned! All the dolls were so anxious to hug Raggedy Ann they could scarcely wait until Marcella had left them alone. When they had squeezed Raggedy Ann almost out of shape, and she had smoothed out her yarn hair, patted her apron out, and felt her shoe-button eyes to see if they were still there, she said, "Well, what have you been doing? Tell me all the news." "Oh, we have just had the usual tea parties and games," said the Tin Soldier. "Tell us about yourself, Raggedy dear. We have missed you so much." "Yes, tell us where have you been and what have you done, Raggedy?" all the dolls cried. But Raggedy Ann just then noticed that one of the penny dolls had a hand missing. "How did this happen?" she asked as she picked up the doll. "I fell off the table and lit upon the Tin Soldier last night when we were playing. But don't mind a thing like that, Raggedy Ann," replied the penny doll. "Tell us of yourself. Have you had a nice time?" "I shall not tell a thing until your hand is mended," Raggedy Ann said. So the Indian ran and brought a bottle of glue. "Where's the hand?" Raggedy asked. "In my pocket," the penny doll answered. When Raggedy Ann had glued the penny doll's hand in place and wrapped a rag around it to hold it until the glue dried, she said, "When I tell you of this wonderful adventure, I know you will all feel very happy. It has made me almost burst my stitches with joy." The dolls all sat upon the floor around Raggedy Ann, the Tin Soldier with his arm over her shoulder. "Well, first, when I left," said Raggedy Ann, "I was placed in the stranger friend's grip. It was rather stuffy in there, but I did not mind it. In fact, I believe I must have fallen asleep, for when I awakened I saw the stranger friend's hand reaching into the grip. Then he lifted me from the grip and danced me upon his knee. 'What do you think of her?' he asked to 3 other men sitting near by. I was so interested in looking out of the window I did not pay any attention to what they said, for we were on a train and the scenery was just flying by. Then I was put back in the grip. When next I was taken from the grip, I was in a large, clean, light room, and there were many, many girls, all dressed in white aprons. The stranger friend showed me to another man and to the girls, who took off my clothes, cut my seams, and took out my cotton. And what do you think? They found my lovely candy heart had not melted at all as I thought. Then they laid me on a table and marked all around my outside edges with a pencil on clean white cloth, and then the girls restuffed me and dressed me. I stayed in the clean, big, light room for 2 or 3 days and nights, and watched my sisters grow from pieces of cloth into rag dolls just like myself." "Your sisters?" the dolls all exclaimed in astonishment. "What do you mean, Raggedy?" "I mean," said Raggedy Ann, "that the stranger friend had borrowed me from Marcella so that he could have patterns made from me, and before I left the big, clean, white room there were hundreds of rag dolls so like me you would not have been able to tell us apart." "We could have told you by your happy smiles!" cried the French dolly. "But all of my sister dolls have smiles just like mine," replied Raggedy Ann. "And shoe-button eyes?" the dolls all asked. "Yes, shoe-button eyes," Raggedy Ann replied. "I would tell you from the others by your dress, Raggedy Ann," said the French doll. "Your dress is 50 years old. I could tell you by that." "But my new sister rag dolls have dresses just like mine, for the stranger friend had cloth made especially for them exactly like mine." "I know how we could tell you from the other rag dolls, even if you all look exactly alike," said the Indian doll. who had been thinking for a long time. "How?" asked Raggedy Ann with a laugh. "By feeling your candy heart. If the doll has a candy heart, then it is you, Raggedy Ann." Raggedy Ann laughed. "I am so glad you all love me as you do, but I am sure you would not be able to tell me from my new sisters, except that I am more worn, for each new rag doll has a candy heart, and on it is written 'I love you,' just as is written on my own candy heart." "And there are hundreds and hundreds of the new rag dolls?" asked the little penny dolls. "Hundreds and hundreds of them, all named Raggedy Ann," replied Raggedy. "Then," said the penny dolls, "we are indeed happy and proud for you, for wherever one of the new Raggedy Ann dolls goes, there will go with it the love and happiness that you give to others."